This is about the global disease burden. You will have heard of average life expectancy. This gives us the average length of time people live in a country, which is of some use in telling us about a country's health. But the disease burden is even more useful and has been used since 1990. And it's a way of quantifying, putting a number on the effects of disease in that country. The acronym DALY stands for Disability Adjusted Life Year, and they're made up of two components. Firstly, the number of years of life that a person loses as a result of dying early due to that disease, for example, heart disease or cancer. Secondly, the number of years that a person lives with that disease as a disability. So, for example, if you have heart failure and you can't work, that would then count towards your poor quality of life and would count towards the DALYs. Together, these add to give the disease burden for the particular disease. So this amazing data comes from an organisation called Our World in Data, which is an amazing data source for geographers. Geographers are interested in patterns and they're interested in global patterns. This map is showing us the DALYs rate from all causes recently in 2017. And it's calculated as a rate per 100,000 population from all causes added together from each disease. So the bigger that number, the larger the number of years of healthy life lost. Because one DALY equals one lost year of healthy life. Yeah. So we can see in North America and South America, we can see lower rates under 40,000 per 100,000. What's standing out on this map is Sub-Saharan Africa, the Horn of Africa, South Africa and West Africa. We can see here much darker red values on this choropleth map, so up to 100,000, which would be one life year loss per person. So the darkest area of this map is for the Central African Republic here, has a value of 96, just over 96,000 DALYs per 100,000, whereas in the UK it's much, much lower. So I'm sure your question might be, what causes the most or highest value of DALYs, or what affects most people on Earth? And the answer is cardiovascular disease. This is heart disease, such as when your arteries become furred up due to eating unhealthy diets, smoking, being overweight, being physically inactive. The blue bars on this chart are all the non-communicable diseases. And you can see that non-communicable diseases dominate, apart from neonatal disorders. These are neonatal disorders relate to babies which are born, newborn babies that are born and then are affected by infections, but these infections can't be treated or are not treated with antibiotics, leading to death. Geographers are interested in comparing between different kinds of countries. On the left-hand side here we have a low-income developing country, one of the poorest countries in the world and the newest country in the world, South Sudan, which was made in 2011 and has been at war almost every year since that date. It has a very low spend in terms of expenditure per capita on its health budget. And you can see that the disease burden is dominated by communicable diseases. The top of the table is all red, and the biggest effect of disease on the population is through diarrhoea and infectious disease. If we look on the right-hand side, we can see by contrast that the top of the table is all blue, indicating that non-communicable diseases dominate the burden, disease burden in the United Kingdom. Cancer and cardiovascular disease come top of that table. So having looked at the relationship between the diseases which are found in two different countries at opposite ends of the development spectrum, let's now have a look at this graph. The red line is showing the DALYs lost due to communicable diseases, the blue line for non-communicable diseases. What we've got on the y-axis here is we've got the DALYs as a rate per 100,000, and on the x-axis we've got GNI per capita. That's the gross national income per capita. That's the average amount of money people have as their wages in that country, measured in US dollars. So as we can see, increasing the DALYs rate is related to a decrease in the GNI per capita. So we've got a negative correlation here in the red line. We've also got a weaker negative correlation for the blue line. You may be able to think about why that is. As countries get richer and move along this trajectory in terms of increasing income, these are often linked to persistent problems with non-communicable diseases, linked to those lifestyle factors which we looked at previously in a previous video. So for all but the very poorest countries with low levels of income, non-communicable diseases dominate in terms of the global burden. But for a few countries, their disease burden is dominated by non-communicable diseases. Most countries will have more non-communicable diseases compared with communicable diseases, apart from these select group of low-income countries. When we look at the health expenditure per capita, this is the amount the government is expending on health per person in that country, we can see that we have a very interesting relationship. This is health expenditure on the x-axis, this is the disease burden on the y-axis. We can see that at relatively low levels of spend, under about $1,500 per person, the disease burden starts to fall rapidly. So we can see a relationship that the more you spend, the lower your disease burden. But we can see significantly if you spend more than 2,000 US dollars per person per year, you can see that there's a levelling off impact. So here's having less effect on the disease burden. Let's review what we've learnt. A DALY is a way of measuring premature death and disability from a disease, to give you an idea of which diseases are the most significant in a population. DALYs have the very highest rates in sub-Saharan Africa. In advanced countries, our disease burden is dominated by non-communicable diseases. In the UK, that's heart disease, the cardiovascular disease. The disease burden will enable planners and health workers to determine their health priorities and to increase their expenditure. But what we saw is over $2,000 per person per year. It won't necessarily reduce the DALYs, because we can see countries like Switzerland spending an awful lot more than that, but for no effect. And finally, in almost all countries, apart from the lowest income countries, non-communicable disease burden is greater than the communicable disease burden.